Is going to be a combination of modules 31 and 32, which is going to be more on about monetary policy. A lot of this stuff is stuff we've already gone over. We're just going to kind of hone in and get into a little bit more details about monetary policy. So again, monetary policy and the interest rate. The Fed targets a federal funds rate, and they do this by adjusting the money supply. Buying or selling bonds is the way they adjust the federal funds rate. So if the current federal funds rate is higher than the target rate, right, they want to bring it down, so they're going to increase the money supply so the target interest rate falls. And then, of course, vice versa. If the current federal funds rate is lower than they would like, they want to raise it, they're going to sell bonds to target the money supply. And of course, that looks like this. You have your vertical money supply graph. There's your equilibrium interest rate. They're going to increase the money supply, shift it to the right. You have a new quantity of money. There's your new interest rate going down. Okay? And so that's the Fed targeting the federal funds rate. And again, they do this through the buying and selling of bonds, or as we call it, open market operations. So let's look at monetary policy and aggregate demand. Again, this is stuff that you should already know. But again, you know, for most of you, it's not going to hurt to hear this one more time, because this is the part that gives so many of you problems. So expansionary monetary policy. Fed sees a recessionary gap. They want to close the recessionary gap, so they want to increase the money supply. They can buy bonds. They can lower the discount rate. They can lower the reserve requirement. Again, buying bonds is the most common. When they increase the money supply, the interest rate falls. When the interest rate falls, investment increases as well as interest-sensitive consumption. Aggregate demand is going to shift to the right. And then from there, real GDP increases, unemployment decreases, and the price level rises. Right? Extremely important you understand that chain of events. Contractionary monetary policy. Fed sees that the economy is experiencing an inflationary gap, or they're worried about inflation. So they're going to engage in contractionary monetary policy, selling bonds. But they can also make a higher discount rate. They can also make a higher reserve requirement. That will decrease the money supply. From there, the interest rate is going to rise. With a higher interest rate, businesses are not going to be so quick to invest. Consumption, interest-sensitive consumption, is going to decrease. And aggregate demand is going to shift to the left. This is going to decrease real GDP, increase unemployment, and decrease the aggregate price level. Okay? Again, most of you should know this. All of you should know it, but this should serve as a good reminder for those of you that are still having problems figuring this out. Now, let's look at what happens in the long run and the short run when we increase the money supply. So let's look at an economy in long run equilibrium, right? So we're looking at if you look at the graph there, we're looking at the convergence of AD1, SRAS1, and long-run aggregate supply. Okay? It's right here where the little pointer is. Let me see if I can do this. Right? So if the Fed were to conduct expansionary monetary policy, as we just said, the interest rate is going to fall. With a lower interest rate, what's going to happen? Aggregate demand is going to shift to the right, right? That puts us at a new equilibrium at a price level of 2. Our output has increased. Unemployment has gone down. Okay? In the short run, real GDP increases, but the aggregate price level increases also, right? And so, again, this is a chain of events that we've talked about many times. What happens is workers feel poorer because unemployment is so low. Workers are able to negotiate for a higher nominal wage. Eventually, nominal wages are going to rise, shifting short-run aggregate supply back to the left, and this creates a higher price level, okay? But we've stayed at our equilibrium output here, okay? And remember, in the long run, the only thing that changes is the price level, okay? So long-run equilibrium is reestablished at our potential GDP, our potential output, our natural rate of unemployment, and we have a higher price level. How do workers feel? Well, workers feel essentially the same because although prices are higher, they've also negotiated for a higher nominal wage. And so, what can we say about expansionary policy in the long run? Well, it's not going to increase real GDP. It can only cause inflation, right? And so this is something to keep in mind. Critics of monetary policy say, look, we continue to increase the money supply and we're going to be experiencing high inflation. We shouldn't be doing that. Okay, that hasn't worked out that way in reality. We don't need to get into all the reasons, but that is the criticism of monetary policy. Now, let's look at this idea of the neutrality of money. What this says is the changes in the money supply have no real effects on the economy. Okay, real meaning real versus nominal. In the long run, the only effect that the money supply is going to have is to raise the price level by the same percentage that the money supply increased by. And so this is what's known as the neutrality of money. And I'm going to go ahead and explain what I mean by this. So how does money neutrality work? So let's say all the prices in the economy double, right? Everything goes up by twice as much. Well, here's what happens. If the money supply doubles at the same time, what we're going to see is that nothing changes. Okay, prices have gone up, money have gone up, and we're going to look at a graph that shows you kind of why this is the case, right? All the real variables, right? Real GDP, real value of money, right? Real purchasing power, real wages remain unchanged. What changes? Nominal values, okay? And so increasing the money supply is not going to change economic behavior because everyone feels the same as they did before. Their real value, real is how you feel, is the same. Okay? So let's take a look at this graph, and this, I think, will help you visualize what's happening. Okay? So let's suppose that the market is in equilibrium at right here at R1. Okay? E1, money demand 1, money supply 1. Here the market's in equilibrium. Okay? Let's say we increase the money supply by 10%. Okay, so money supply increases by 10%, interest rate falls. All right, we can assume that the interest rate is going to fall by 10%. Because of the neutrality of money, what's happening is the price level is going to rise by that same amount, 10%. Right? What happens in the economy when prices rise? What do people need to do? Think about the curve we're looking at here. They need to demand more money. And so if prices are higher by 10%, what's going to happen? Money demand is going to rise by 10%. Okay? And so they increase their demand for money by 10%. The demand for money shifts right. And what do we have? Right? We're back to our initial long run, or back to our initial equilibrium rate. Okay? So this is how money neutrality works in the long run. Eventually, you just get to the same place you were before. All right? And that's an important idea to understand. Okay? Again, please ask questions if you have them. And if you've made it this far, you have a nice little reward. You get to look at my dog, Shadow.